What's up everybody, welcome back. So it's part 5 already of the multiplayer mech project, and today I want to take a look at setting up the projectiles for the enemy, and we're also going to take a look at the collision for the projectiles. There's one small thing I want to take a look at from the previous video, so let's do that first. And it's not really an issue, but I just want to make sure I noticed it. So if we take a look at the animation blueprint that we set up for our enemy, over here on the layered blend per bone node, when I use the scroll wheel, I accidentally set the blend depth over here to -2 instead of -1. So I don't really even think it's an issue, because minus simply means it doesn't blend after this bone. But let's make sure we set this one to -1 as well, so everything matches up again. So that's on the layered blend per bone node. In the animation graph, you want to make sure those are -1 and the pelvis is set to 4. Again, I don't think it's really causing any issues, but just for completion's sake. Okay, cool. With that out of the way, we're going to take a look at setting up the projectile. So let's go to the projectiles folder, and over here we have the base projectile. So we're going to right click it and create a new child blueprint class. And let's call this our BP projectile rate, however you want to call him. And let's open it up. So first of all, we're going to set up the components. The sphere collision, we can make that a little bit smaller. So let's make that about 10 units in radius. Then we want to set up the particle system. So let's select that. And I'm going to use the primary trial particle. So if you look for primary trial, and then we're going to select the rate one, not the howitzer one. And this is pretty big, so I'm also going to scale it down. I'm going to set the scale to 0.3. And then you could move it back a little bit, so the tip actually is aligned with the sphere collision. That looks a tiny bit better, but you probably won't notice the difference in game. The last thing we want to do is go to the projectile movement, and in here we're going to set it up as well. We're going to set the initial speed to 2000 and the maximum speed 2000 as well. The initial velocity in local space is going to be true, and then we're going to set the gravity scale to 0. And for the auto activation on this one, we're actually going to say enabled. So if you scroll down, you want to enable auto activate. That should be all for the defaults. So then we can set up our construction script. And we don't want to run the parent construction script, so we can get rid of that one. And then we want to set up some variables. So I'm going to show the inherited variables. And in here, let's set up the explosion fx template. So this one. And let me have a look. So that's going to be the primary hit character from rate. So let's look for that one. Primary hit character. Over here, right, primary hit character. That's the one I'm using. Then we're going to set the explosion fx scale, and that's simply going to be 1. So type in all ones. The next thing is the explosion sound. Hook that one up, and I'm using the, let me see, hit generic 5-1. So all of these files come from the sound packs that we downloaded in the first episode. So over here, the sound cue, hit generic 5-1. And the last thing you could do is set up the volume multiplier. And I'm going to set the volume to 0.5, so it's a little bit less loud. So that's all we need to do to set up our projectile. So we can close that one down. And now we're going to use a notify in the fire animation to make sure it actually fires. So the easiest thing to do probably is go into our BP enemy right. And over here we have the multicast attack montage, where we're actually playing the montage. Click the little magnification glass over here. And it should bring you to the actual montage in the content browser. So we're going to open this one up. And then we want to set it at the point where he actually starts firing. So let's almost at the beginning, probably somewhere over here at frame 1. Then we're going to go to the notifies, right click over here, add notify, and then create a new notify at the top over here. So I'm going to call this the animation, so anim, and then weapon fired. Oh, fat fingered it. There we go. So we have an animation notify in place inside of our montage. Let's save it, and we can get rid of that one as well. Now we want to set this up inside of our enemy base character. So we're going to go back to the enemies folder and open our enemy base character. And we're going to do something similar as what we did with the multicast event. We're going to create an empty event in here so we can override it inside of our child blueprint. So let me grab my notes to make sure I got the naming correctly. It's actually animation weapon fired, so that's the same as the notify. So let's add a custom event, and I'm going to call this anim weapon fired. And we don't want to replicate this. So this is just a normal custom event, and well, I'm going to explain it in a second. So let's just add it here. We're going to leave the event empty so we can override it inside of our child blueprint. The next step is inside of our animation blueprint. So let's go to the right folder and open our animation blueprint. And now we want to set up something in our event graph. So we're going to open the event graph. And the first thing we need is the blueprint initialize animation event. So let's select that one. And for initialize animation, we want to get the pawn owner of this animation blueprint. So try get pawn owner, and then we can first check if this is valid. So make sure we have a valid pawn, hook it up, and then we're gonna cast this to our base enemy. So cast to enemy base, and hook that up to the is valid pin, and then we want to promote that to a variable. So let's just drag off here, promote to variable, and I'm going to call it BP enemy base. There we go. Now we want to select the event that fires when our notify fires that we put in the animation montage. So if we right click and we look for notify animation weapon fired, we get an event called like that. So we can select that. And as soon as the animation notify in our montage triggers, this event will fire. So then we're going to grab our enemy base blueprint and we're going to call the event that we just created, which was animation weapon fired. And simply hook it up over here. So that means every time the animation notify in the montage is triggered, this event will be called on our base character. And we can override that event inside of our child character, and that's what we're going to do next. So we want to open our enemy right character again, and in here we're going to add the event animation weapon fired. So event anim weapon fired, and this will override the event inside of our parent blueprint. And in here we can simply spawn the projectiles, emitters and sounds, because this animation blueprint runs on every player, on all instances of the character. So this animation notify will also fire on all instances of our character. So we don't need to replicate this in a multicast event, because this event will fire on all instances. So let's add that to the comment bubble first, all instances. And that actually saves us doing some replication, so we don't need to do this server side and then use a multicast event to replicate the projectile. It's a very straightforward projectile without any gravity and things like that. It has a fixed velocity, so it's pretty simple just to spawn it on each instance, and that should work fine. So the first thing, let's spawn a sound. So play sound at location. And for this one, I'm going to use the sci-fi shot 126. So sci-fi shot, and then we have multiple ones in here. So I'm going to select sci-fi shot 126Q. The location, I'm simply going to use the actor location. So get actor location. And then the volume multiplier, I'm going to make it 0.4, otherwise it's pretty loud, and there's going to be a bunch of enemies at the same time firing, so it could be pretty overwhelming, so I'm going to turn it down a little bit. The next thing we want to do is spawn the muzzle flash emitter, so we're going to spawn an emitter attached, the lower one over here. We're going to attach that to our character mesh, so we can drag in the mesh component and simply plug that in. And the actual emitter we're going to spawn is the primary muzzle flash from right. So let's look for primary muzzle flash and then select the right one over here. And then for the location type, we want to set it to snap to target and then keep the world scale. We're going to leave the scale at 1, that should be okay. And the last thing we want to do in here is spawn the actual projectile. So drag over here again, and we're going to spawn an actor from class. Select our projectile right in here. So BP projectile right. And let's right click the spawn transform, and we're going to split the struct pin. So the transform for the spawn location is going to be the muzzle socket of our character. So we're going to drag in the mesh, and we're going to drag off the mesh and get a socket location. And then we want to get the muzzle underscore 01. Okay, caps lock is on, so you actually don't want to use all caps. So muzzle underscore 01, and hook that one up to the spawn transform location. So that's simply a socket on the right character over here. If you look for muzzle, and then the socket one is the one at the tip of the barrel, so that's the one that we're using. And for the spawn transform rotation, we're going to use our get unit direction vector again. So we're going to drag off the muzzle, and we're going to get a unit direction vector from the muzzle to the enemy we want to fire at, and that's actually a variable. That's our player to attack. So again, if the player to attack doesn't show up, you need to enable the show inherited variables over here, or you can just leave it disabled and then get the player to attack, and it will be in the list over here. So from the player to attack, we're going to get the actor location, and that's the position we want to fire at. So we're going to plug that in over here. And we can simply plug this into the rotation, and it will convert it using a rotation from X vector. So that should work fine. And this is actually all we need to do to set up our projectile. So again, as I mentioned, we have the montage playing in a multicast event. So this montage will play on all instances of the character and all instances of the animation blueprint. So our animation notify will trigger on all instances as well. So that's why we don't need to do any extra replication in here to make it work. So we're saving ourselves a little bit of replication just by setting it up smart, probably. Well, this should actually work, so let's hit play, and now our enemy should be able to fire at us. There we go. And you can also hear the fire sounds and see the muzzle flashes, although the muzzle flash is pointed 90 degrees to the right, it looks like. Let me check. Oh, that's because we didn't enter the attach point name in here. So we want to grab the muzzle socket from the weapon, and we want to enter that in the attach point name on the spawn emitter to attach node. And now the muzzle flash should point in the right direction as well. So let's double check. There we go, that looks a lot better. So we have sounds, muzzle flash, and projectile spawning. There is one issue. Most of the projectiles don't collide. And that's because we set the collision for pawns to ignore on our projectile. And the reason we did that is because by default, let me grab the enemy base in here. So the capital component has a collision setting, and the preset over here is pawn. But the preset, we cannot use that to identify any objects, but the object type is also pawn. So this is a bit confusing, but it's not related. We simply want to look at the object type. The object type over here is pawn, and if we look at the character mesh, then the object type is also pawn. This is called the character mesh, but that's simply the profile we're using, and again, we cannot identify the profile. So to make sure that we collide with the actual mesh and not with the capsule component of the player we're shooting at, and also not with our own capsule if we spawn the projectile, we want to do some setup for the collision. So let's get rid of the blueprints for now. Let's save everything. And we're going to go to the project settings, and we're going to create 2 new object channels. So let's go to edit project settings. And on the left side, you want to go to the collision tab, and over here we can add new object channels. So we're going to create a new object channel, and the first one is character AI, character underscore AI, and we're going to set the default response to ignore and then accept it. And we're going to create a second object channel over here, and that's going to be character player, character underscore player. And again, the default response is going to be ignore, and then accept that one as well. So we have 2 new object types we can work with, and now we can identify the difference between a capsule and a player mesh and an enemy mesh. So now we want to set things up, and let's start with our enemy base. So we're going to open the enemy base blueprint, and we want to set the mesh object type in here to character AI. So let's go to the mesh over here and scroll down to the collision settings, and then over here it's set to character mesh. So make sure it's character mesh first, and then you're going to select custom over here. So it will keep the settings, and then we're going to change the object type simply to our character AI. That should be good. So let's compile and save. Because this is the parent blueprint, it should automatically update our enemy right. So if we check the mesh for enemy right and scroll down, it should have the character AI object type as well. So make sure that's actually set. Then we want to open our player mech. So let's go to mech and open our BP player mech. And you might have guessed it, in here we're going to set the mesh to the character player object type. So let's select the mesh, and you might also want to select the other meshes that are attached to it, so everything actually has collision. Then we're going to scroll down, and by default those are set to no collision. So let's change it to character mesh first, and then we're going to set custom collision and change the object type to character player. So that should work. Compile and save. And now the last thing we want to do is set up the collision for the projectiles. So let's go to the projectiles folder, and for the mech main gun over here, we're going to open it up, select the sphere collision and scroll down. And because this is the player projectile, we want to make sure that it blocks the character AI channel. So we're going to go to the character AI object type, and we're going to set it to block over here. And we want to do the same thing for the right projectile, but in that case we want to block the character player object type. So we're going to go to projectile right, select our sphere collision, and then over here we're going to set the character player to block. Now this should work. So now we should be able to actually get hit by the enemy projectiles. There we go. And you can actually hear the impact sound as well when they explode, and you can see they hit the leg, for example, or hit the main turret base, so it actually collides with the mesh. And if we shoot at an enemy, it should also, there we go, collide with the actual mesh of the enemy. So if you shoot further away, it will simply travel over him because we're shooting with an arc. But if you're close to the player and aim, or close to the enemy and aim behind him, you will see it actually collides with the enemies as well. Okay, so that was pretty straightforward, and we have actual shooting set up as well. In the next episode, we're going to take a look at setting up the health for the AI, so we can actually shoot them and kill them. And after that, we're going to set up the health for the mech and also the HUD for the player with the health bar and things like that. So a short episode. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider leaving a like. If you want to get your hands on the project file, you can go to the Discord and simply download them there for free. So go check out my Discord as well. There's tons of other projects you can download, so enjoy. Thanks for watching, everybody. Talk to you later. Bye bye.